Saturday mornings in Sycamore Ridge have a rhythm you can set your watch to. Sprinklers ticking in unison, someone scorching toast down the block, a lawnmower coughing awake like an old dog. Mine began with a pop, a hiss, and a silence so deep it rang in my ears. My rig went dark mid-sentence. 1 second I was trading weather notes with a rancher in the high plains. The next I was staring at a dead set of dials, the faint smell of ozone hanging in the room like a bad joke. I knew it wasn't chance. Equipment doesn't die that neatly unless someone helps it along. So I stepped outside, mug in hand, and there she was cutting across the side yard with purpose. Marla Pierce, 40-something with a crisp bob, and that HOA president posture like she's perpetually posing for a brochure. She had pruning shears in one hand like she'd just given roses a haircut. Only we both knew there were no roses, just a cleanly severed stretch of coax swinging from the siding like a cut vein. "This is a violation," she declared before I could open my mouth. Chin lifted, eyes bright with certainty. "You were warned about unauthorized installations." I looked at the limp cable, looked at the shears, then looked at her. "You know cutting licensed communication lines is a federal crime, right?" Her jaw twitched, but she clicked the shears shut like punctuation and smiled without warmth. "This neighborhood has rules," she said, "and I enforce them. There are moments when you learn who someone really is." That morning, I learned Marla would rather rewrite reality than accept it. What she called an eyesore, I called a lifeline, storm spotting, emergency nets, volunteer links that wake up when sirens do. And I wasn't going to educate her on my porch. I powered down what was still humming, sat at my desk, and did the least dramatic, most effective thing I know. I filed a report. Quiet documentation beats loud indignation every time. Our cul-de-sac runs on gossip like it runs on sprinkler water. By noon, my neighbor Duke wandered over with a grin, shaking his head. "She's at the pool bragging she cut your spy cables," he said. "Apparently you were about to report the neighborhood to the Chinese Ministry of Garage Doors." I laughed, but there was a rock in my stomach. People like Marla mistake fear for leadership, and fear spreads faster than facts. 2 days later, the rhythm of the street stuttered. 3 dark SUVs slid to a stop with the choreography of people who practice stopping. Agents stepped out with polite efficiency, credentials flashed so quickly they might as well have been white cards, and asked if they could see my setup. I said sure. I had nothing to hide. When they got to the side yard and saw the snip cable, they traded one of those glances that says we already know. They didn't need names. We were still on my porch when Marla drifted closer, curiosity tugging her like a leash. An agent turned, pointed across the street, and asked, "Ma'am, did you tamper with this resident's communications equipment?" Her face ran through shock, indignation, denial, calculation, then that tight smile she wore like armor. "Those lines violate community covenants," she said, as if bylaws outrank federal law. "Ma'am," the agent replied, voice flat as a ruler, "these are federally licensed communications. Cutting them is a violation of federal law." For a second I thought her knees might fold. They didn't cuff her, that's not how it works, but they made the point and left. You could feel the cul-de-sac breathe out, and then hold its breath again. I figured that would be the warning shot Marla needed. I figured wrong. 3 mornings later, a stapled packet landed on my porch without an envelope. "Emergency Community Safety Directive." The header screamed in fonts that tried too hard. My antenna named as a hazard to health with a ticking 7-day deadline to remove everything or face escalating enforcement. I laughed, and then I started photographing. Don't argue with a bonfire. Show the fire marshal where the accelerant is. By lunch, our HOA group chat foamed over with commentary about how my transmissions were making baby monitors babble and garage doors open during church. Someone even floated pacemakers. I wanted to type a paragraph starting with, "That's not how any of this works," but I didn't. Arguing with Marla in writing is like throwing a meatball sub into a fan. It just paints the room. Instead, I called Cal, the guy I run storm nets with, and he gave me the same advice he always gives: log everything and breathe. Then came the flags. I pulled into my driveway that evening to find bright orange survey markers zigzagging across my lawn like a toddler's treasure map. A utility crewman shrugged at me, said they'd gotten a request from the HOA to check for unauthorized underground lines. My cables were above ground and permitted, but that wasn't the point. The point was leverage. Turn city services into her private cudgel, and pray nobody checks the facts too closely. A county deputy knocked that weekend on a noise complaint. He looked embarrassed before he even asked his first question. I showed him my logbook, my hours, the decibel rating that wouldn't wake a cat. "You're fine," he said, then looked down the street toward Marla's house. "We'll mark it closed." She was standing in her driveway with her arms crossed, eyes bright, with that righteous heat that says this isn't over. She was right. The interference started 2 nights later. Bursts that didn't sound like weather or unlicensed chatter. Bursts that landed right on top of me the second I keyed up. Once, twice, 3 times, and there it was, deliberate jamming. It doesn't take much money to buy a cheap jammer you don't understand. It takes even less to not care who else you're stepping on. I filed another report, flagged it urgent. Emergency planes, fireground chatter, volunteer nets. Those bands aren't a playground. The next evening, a white van with antennas bristling like a porcupine rolled down our street. The agents didn't bother with my porch this time. They went to hers. I watched from my steps as they held up a handheld spectrum analyzer that was basically a neon arrow saying the noise is coming from inside this house. They didn't arrest her, not yet. They told her what it was and what would happen if it continued. The look she gave me over the agent's shoulder could have stripped paint. You'd think that would be the end of it. It was the beginning of a different phase. By morning, there was a plywood sign hammered into my lawn. My lawn, not hers. Danger, illegal radio station, hazard to health. She'd staked it deep like she owned the dirt under my grass. I took pictures. Lots of them. 2 hours later, my inbox pinged with a lawyerly letter from concerned residents demanding immediate removal of my equipment for the safety of the community. It read like something Marla drafted at midnight and fed to a paralegal for seasoning. I brought a copy to the special HOA meeting she called that week. The community room was half fluorescent light, half theater. Marla stood at the front with slides about radiation plumes and signal bleed that looked official if you didn't know a S-meter from a speedometer. At one point, she waved to a lean man beside her, licensed communications consultant, who clicked to a slide with my address circled in red. The murmurs were the kind you get when somebody says the word cancer. When the floor opened, I walked to the mic and kept my voice even. "Everything you're hearing about my station is false," I said. "It's licensed and compliant. Federal agents were here. The only illegal device they found didn't belong to me." I didn't raise my phone to show the video of her creeping along my fence line at 2 a.m. with a tape measure and a flashlight. I didn't need to. The room was already starting to feel the weight of her narrative bending in their hands. "Doctoring evidence is still a crime," she snapped, voice climbing octaves. The consultant closed his laptop and stared at the floor. People shifted in their folding chairs, the way people shift when a magic trick goes wrong and they realize they've been staring at the wrong hand. That night my shack went dark again, not because she cut a cable this time, but because someone pried the lock off my exterior breaker panel and flipped what they didn't own. I called the sheriff. The deputy didn't apologize this time. He took notes, took photos, and told me a detective would follow up. By dawn, the street had a different energy, less curiosity, more fatigue. Folks had watched a neighborhood argument migrate into something colder. They weren't sure which side would embarrass them if they picked it. The van came back. The agents asked me to run the shack like nothing had happened, to keep my logs as clean and boring as possible. "Consistency helps us see the noise," one of them said, and I understood. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing different at all. 2 nights later, guy wires on my mast were slashed. The tower leaned like a man who'd taken a bad punch and refused to drop. The cameras caught a shadow slipping away, a hoodie, fast shoes, nothing a jury would fall in love with. I didn't need an ID to know the pattern. I made coffee at 3 in the morning and waited in the hum. The agents didn't sleep. Neither did I. If this were a tidy story, that would have been the crescendo, the lesson delivered, the enemy spent. Instead, Marla changed costumes. Her online persona reappeared with a new name and the same cadence. Random capital letters, breathless claims about being a whistleblower punished by secret feds, my antenna now a covert tower. A law firm letter here, a private security inspection there. Men in pressed polos standing on my porch telling me they were retained by the HOA to conduct safety checks. I filmed them and told them to leave. They did, but not before one of them let his eyes flick toward my camera like he wanted to memorize the lens. The drone was almost funny, consumer grade, loud enough to hear from the kitchen, hovering over my yard like a curious mosquito. 10 minutes later, a text arrived from an unknown number with a photo of me from above and the words "still watching" typed over it. I saved the image into a folder that had become the strangest scrapbook of my adult life. The agent said Annette. You could feel it if you knew what you were looking for. Mobile receivers tucked into unremarkable cars, a temporary antenna down by the community center, unmarked sedans idling at strange hours. They were patient, and patience is a kind of trap. My job was to keep talking like nothing had changed, to let my voice ride the ether the way it does when storms roll across county lines and volunteers listen for each other in the static. Just after 9 on a Wednesday, a packet went out on a restricted band, quick and dirty, the kind that announces itself to anyone paying attention. The mobile antennas tilted like compass needles finding north. Agents moved on a rental 2 houses down from Marla's. Empty for months, blinds always shut. 10 minutes after the front door opened, they started carrying equipment out. High-power transmitters, a rack with heat scars, a laptop with cables still plugged like a plate of spaghetti, and then a man I didn't recognize in handcuffs, a face that said he used to be licensed a long time ago and had never forgiven the day that ended. Marla wasn't there, not that morning. Her accounts went quiet, the sign disappeared, the board sent out a newsletter about approved mulch. For 3 days the air felt empty in a way that felt good. Duke came over with a 6-pack and sat on the steps like we used to when the world was simpler. Maybe that's that, he said. I've never seen her take a hint, I said. He shook his head. Maybe she'll take a warrant. She didn't take either. She posted again, different platform, same voice, painting herself as a patriot with a hobby and me as the enemy of whatever she felt like defending that hour. Then, late one night, a voice broke onto a band it had no business touching. Male, clear, saying my name like a dare. You think you're safe? And then nothing. There's a difference between incompetence and intent. This was the second one. 2 nights after that my cameras picked up 3 figures slipping over my back fence. The kind of move you can tell yourself is a deer until you see the way a human crouches. They carried a duffel. They went straight for the base of the mast. One pulled out a cutter, the other a canister. I stayed inside. I called 911 and the agent whose number I never saved under his real name. Law enforcement moved like they'd rehearsed it, because they'd been waiting. The 3 scattered. 2 didn't make the fence. The 3rd almost did, until the porch light found her face and there was no denying who she was. Even in that moment Marla tried to stand taller than she felt. I'm protecting my community, she said to no one who cared, and then they read her rights. I watched from my steps with coffee gone cold in my hand, and the neighborhood watched me watching, phones up, little blue record lights blinking like fireflies. By noon the next day, a local reporter was standing by my mailbox asking for comment while the van crew checked my guy wires. I kept it boring. License station, ongoing investigation, grateful for the professionals doing their jobs. The clip ran that night between a story about a school board and one about a pothole big enough to name. And for the first time since the first cut cable, I felt my shoulders lower. It didn't end there. People like Marla don't end so much as run out of road, but it did change tone. The board put out a statement about respecting federal law. The rental down the block produced boxes of gear and the paper trail that comes with people who think rules are for other folks. The consultant resurfaced as a mugshot and a name I recognized from an old enforcement bulletin. Cal texted me with a single word. Bingo. Neighbors waved again. The kind of sheepish wave people offer when they remember you're a human being and not a storyline they were enjoying. The night after her arrest, the airwaves were empty in the sweetest way. I sat in the glow of the shack, headset warm against my ear, and checked in with voices I've known for years. North Texas, the Ozarks, a guy outside Helena who has a laugh like gravel and a habit of checking on people after storms. Heard you had some excitement, he said. You holding up? I'm good, I said. Rig's steady. Logs are clean. Coffee's hot. Then you're better than most, he said, and we rolled into a conversation about a squall line that would miss us both by dawn. Marla posted one more time after she made bail. Something about secret police and a conspiracy to silence homeowners who care about property values. I didn't respond. The evidence was doing that for me in a way no speech could. A week later, the SUVs came back, not for me, not for her house, but for a storage unit off the highway registered to a shell. Inside were the rest of the toys, the good ones, the kind that moved from misdemeanor to felony without much paperwork. You could feel the tide turn the way you feel the air change before rain. The morning after, I brewed coffee and sat on the porch. The cul-de-sac sounded like itself again. Lawnmowers, kids shouting the rules of a game they'd invented 5 minutes earlier, a delivery truck grinding its gears at the corner. My mast stood straight, wires tight, paint nicked by hands that didn't own it, and still standing. Duke ambled over and handed me a bottle like we were celebrating something. "You won," he said. I thought about that. About what winning would even look like in a story like this. "No," I said. "I just didn't lose the way she wanted." He nodded, like that made more sense than it should, and we watched a pair of hawks ride a thermal up past the water tower until they were just pencil tips in the bright. Here's what I learned, and it didn't come in a flash. It came in 100 small moments of choosing the boring thing over the satisfying one, choosing to document instead of argue, to breathe instead of bark, to let professionals be professional. Power without accountability is theater, loud, righteous, and flimsy. Authority that knows its own limits doesn't need volume. And the calmest voice in the room, the one with receipts and patience, usually writes the last paragraph. I keyed the mic that night and sent a simple line to the net we run for storm season, the one that woke me up to ham radio's quiet, stubborn beauty in the first place. "Station secure," I said. "All clear." Replies rolled in from places I've never stood on, but know by the shape of their lightning on radar. "Copy that. Good to hear. Stay safe out there." And I sat back with the headset around my neck, listening to the good kind of static. If you've ever had a Marla in your life, someone who confuses control for care, tell me how you handled it, where you drew the line, what you wish you'd done earlier. Drop your story in the comments. Argue with me if you need to. Tell me where you think the line between community and overreach really is. If this one kept you listening, hit like, share it with someone who thinks antennas are just metal poles, and subscribe, because sometimes the most ordinary street in America is one bad decision away from becoming a lesson